Bom dia. Sim, podemos começar. Antes de mais nada, bem-vindos. Obrigada por estarem presentes e devo-vos dizer que é um prazer voltar a ver este auditório cheio de novo, outra vez. É bom estarmos de volta. É com muito prazer que recebemos mais uma vez este ano uma das extensões do CINANIMA, Festival Internacional de Cinema de Animação de Espinho, que este ano comemora 45 anos. É verdade, são 45 anos consecutivos a divulgar do que se faz do melhor no mundo do cinema de animação. E uma vez que são 45 anos, penso que este ano temos um programa especial. É verdade, Johnny? Sim?
Sem dúvida.
Queres falar um bocadinho então sobre o festival deste ano?
Sim, pronto. Este ano temos a nossa 45ª edição e estamos a tentar fazer tudo para que seja marcante e especial, para que as pessoas se relembrem tudo aquilo que faz o CINANIMA um certame tão especial no panorama da animação portuguesa e até europeia e mundial. Eu, gostaria que vocês também pudessem vir a Espinho ver tudo a decorrer na cidade, mas nós também temos outros eventos a decorrer em outros pontos, como por exemplo as instalações da Lea Vidakovic. Temos uma no Jardim Botânico no Porto, chamada Splendid Isolation, que é uma obra absolutamente notável e eu acho que deveriam visitar se tiverem a oportunidade, e está lá até dia 28, certo?
Until the
28th?
Yes.
Pronto, tem até dia 28 para ver. E também temos uma instalação dela em Espinho, na Junta de Freguesia, chamada Sisters, que vamos ter durante estes dias. E se conseguirem ir até Espinho, sugeria que também passassem por lá para verem tudo em movimento, digamos assim. E ela hoje vai falar-nos sobre a sua abordagem multidisciplinar à animação e aquilo que chamamos de animação expandida, que é algo que cada vez tem ganho contornos cada vez mais relevantes ao longo destes últimos anos. E, sim, essencialmente, juntem-se a nós no CINANIMA e queríamos agradecer aos nossos grandes parceiros por nos convidarem mais uma vez.
Nós é que agradecemos.
E vamos dar a palavra a Lea e deixar-nos mostrar-nos tudo o que ela sabe.
So Lea, you are really welcome. Okay.
Thank you.
And just another little thing, so a Lea é da Sérvia, como o Johnny fez referência, ela realmente tem vindo a desenvolver muitos trabalhos no âmbito da instalação e da animação de marionetas, e ela realmente junta o melhor destes dois mundos. As instalações animadas que ela faz são qualquer coisa que vocês devem prestar atenção. Por isso a Lea vai apresentar um pouco do seu trabalho, vai falar sobretudo também destas instalações em específico, que deixa-me reforçar que estão cá, uma no Porto e outra em Espinho. O Festival de Espinho, o Festival de CINANIMA, está a decorrer até 14 de novembro. Até domingo, está bem? E a Lea então vai-vos falar sobre este processo que acho que é super interessante e eu acho que vocês devem aproveitar. No final da apresentação da Lea temos um espaço para perguntas e respostas. Peço que vocês aproveitem o facto de terem aqui uma jovem realizadora que fez o mesmo percurso que muitos de vocês neste momento estão a começar a fazer. Por isso aproveitem no final para lhe perguntar tudo aquilo que vocês gostariam de saber, está bem? So Lea, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
On the other side. Okay?
Yeah, thank you. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm really thankful for CINANIMA Festival and for your school to host me today. I think it's really great to collaborate on the festivals and to bring the animation to school. And today I will present you some of my journey, how I happen to be from art all the way to animation. And I will present some of my works, which I did as a student. And these are the installations that you can see in Porto and in Espinho. And I'm not sure if you told about my background. Sorry if I will repeat some things, but I come from Serbia. But for the past 16 years, I have been living in different countries because mostly I was studying in Zagreb. Then I moved to Norway to study animation. Then I did the Master of Animation in Belgium. It was a Master of Audiovisual Arts, not only animation. And finally, I lived for 3 years in Singapore, where I did my PhD studies. And this is something like a crown to my practical work, because in this way I work now both in practical part, producing animated shorts and installations and combining with theory. And the theoretical part, it is about narratives. It is about what is up here. I'm interested in alternative narrative approaches to animation, and what this means shortly is that these are not only linear narratives meant for cinema screening or for a small screen, but in a more expanded and more experimental way, I'm interested how can we tell a different story outside of the screen, like beyond the screen and including some spaces. So this is why I want to start the presentation about spatial storytelling. And what is important to know about spatial storytelling, this means basically that these are any kind of storytelling practices that are happening in a spatial context. And space in this manner can be a very wide concept. It can go from a sheet of paper, from a very simple two-dimensional place, but all the way to any space in the architecture, on a facade, or any kind of building or a cityscape. So for the beginning, I will start with Scott McCloud's way of telling a spatial story, and this is the most simple way how we can understand what is spatial storytelling. And this you can see in a comic. As most of you know, we are creating the story as we are going through the little panels. We are reading one by one, and we are connecting the dots on our own. The storytelling is kind of dependent on the viewer or on the reader, because it is in our own pace that we are going through the story and missing and connecting the links together. And this favorite part of mine is this gap where you see this little man is standing, because this is the space between the two comic panels where it is meant to be for the viewer's imagination. So in this panel, for example, we can see on the first one just some hints of some accident to happen, like a person just about to be killed, and on the next panel we just see some kind of aftermath of the killing. And this space in between is meant for the viewer to imagine what is there. And I think this is such a powerful element, and it is so relevant to any kind of spatial storytelling. And this is why I quoted below McCloud, who said, "To kill a man between panels is to condemn him to 1,000 deaths." And this basically means that everyone can imagine a different kind of story or a different line of action in between these gaps. And so this is a very beginning from a sheet of paper, but storytelling in space can also go and spread in architecture. In earlier days, the churches were meant to tell a story of a Bible for the illiterate people. So in the same way as it is told in the comics, like panel by panel, you have also in the exterior of the church, but also in the interior of it, like certain images from the Bible, which told us about the story. So this is also a kind of spatial storytelling, where we, by walking in the space, connect the dots together and make up the story. And these all are static images in space, but also it is possible to tell a story with the moving images. And this is, for example, a short from Don Hertzfeld, "Everything Will Be Okay," and he's using here different bubbles, showing different audiovisual material in each of these. And it is a kind of a split screen. The concept of the split screen is old from Abel Gance's Napoleon, which was a triptych screened in 1926 or so. So it has been around for almost 100 years that we tell a story on a different screens. But in this very alternative way, for example, in this movie, here the little screens are used to tell the same thing in a different world, because some is showing the very complex internal emotional world that the character is going through while he is here receiving bad news about his health, for example. So in this way, we have several pictures, and they all connect together to tell us the story. And in this example here, the split screen animation is used to tell a story about a character, but from 3 different points of view. It is a point of the view of the patient on the left side, and in the middle is the psychologist, a psychiatrist, and the mother of the character on the right panel. So you can see here the same story divided in 3 different perspectives, and they intermingle and they give us a bigger picture in this way. And this is also one of the earliest and biggest example of a spatial storytelling on many screens. It is for the World Exhibition, which is showing on several screens the one morning of a kind of average American man and how everybody is going through the day. And it is one of the first times that many people were gathered in one space. And here they can see more moving images at once. Also, in the same way, connecting the dots as on the examples before. And today, when we are talking about video mapping and telling images in space, it's never more relevant than now, because today we can have projected a very small image in space, like for example in a cup of coffee, or in your plate in a restaurant, from something very small to a very big one, like video mapping in the cityscape. And in this example here, we can see that the projection actually turned the entire space, the exhibition space, into a canvas, like into a movie theater, but the screen here is becoming dematerialized. So basically the whole space is becoming a screen space where we can go through, and this is an immersive experience where the viewer is free to walk on his own. And this is something I really like, and also I'm using this approach in my work because I think this was the first thing that was very interesting for me, to give the viewer freedom to walk in his own pace and create the story with his own participation. And this is about my own story and how I happened to be here, because I started my my art journey as a painter and a graphic artist, and I studied at the Art Academy in Zagreb. And yeah, my degree was a very traditional one, combining graphic art with painting. And I used to paint foxes and different animals, but mostly foxes in a big quantity, in a different size. And this is something where I come from. But somehow I moved away from this two-dimensional representation of the image. And this is my final work at the Academy, where the image of the fox actually became an object. It is actually my jacket. So it became something a little bit conceptual and more relational, because for the people it is sometimes also easy to mistake a work like that for an accidental work or something. But I found out that such work is kind of craving more attention, or it's a different relation. It's an object, and then you can have a relation towards it. And then I experimented with some installations in space. This was also at the end of my journey at the Art Academy in Zagreb on my bachelor degree. In the gallery I exhibited, it was called the Interior of the Heart, and I exhibited everything which I did during the 4 years of my study. It was kind of the accumulation of all the artworks, and also my personal belongings, because at that time it was very confusing to me which part of your life is your artwork and which is a private one. So I kind of created an exhibition about this confusion. And also I went to exchange and I studied performance in Czech Republic. So these are durational works. This is a performance which was called Swan Sisters, in a gallery in Zagreb, and I used Hans Christian Andersen's story about a girl whose brothers are turned into swans, and for her to break the spell, she had to knit these T-shirts from nettle. You know, nettle is this picky plant which is hurting your needle, your hands. And with a needle, I had only a thread, needles, and a lot of nettle to make these T-shirts to kind of break the spell. And during this time, I was not talking because in the story it was a spell that you cannot talk unless you break. So this magic. So in the gallery, I think I was about 7 days from the beginning to the closing of the gallery. And while I was working there was a sound of me reading the story. So the visitor can come in and have a kind of meditative experience listening to me telling the story. And also many people talk to me, but I was not allowed to talk back. And this space, this gallery is in fact a library during the week when there is no exhibition. So a lot of old people would come there and they will read newspapers and just hang out. And they were a little bit shocked, and they would come to talk to me that what happened, why they cannot sit and read the newspapers. And then I kind of felt that I become, by just sitting there and listening to their story, I just become some kind of medium to receive whatever they had to say. And I like this experience a lot. And also this is another performance when I tried to include a public space. It was a public bath in my hometown. It is a Jewish mikveh, which is not in function anymore. It is in the center of the city. It's a beautiful building, but this was in 2009, and now it's even worse. I mean, we all have this kind of buildings that are being neglected, and yeah, there is not much we can do about it. But my project about the black bath and just me taking a bath here was some kind of an invitation for the public of the city to come to see the opening. At the opening, I didn't bath. It was just a video of me of this, and there was the sound of water and like some kind of atmosphere that can recall what this space was before. And this performance brought a lot of people together, and it was kind of a revival of their memories, because a lot of them learned there how to swim, and there was just a lot of community stories which were revived by my work. Nobody talked about my work, but they all talked to me about their memories of the space. So for me, this was really a nice experience, because I was not, I was just a trigger. This work was a trigger for their own response to the space and what is happening to them. And after that journey to this kind of more open and experimental audio-visual artworks as installation and performance, I got a scholarship to go to study a Master of Arts in Norway. And I thought that I will continue on the same line of the performance, maybe some socially engaged topics as well and installations, but it happened that it was some kind of misunderstanding, and the school was not really what I expected. And I was stranded in Norway, and they offered me to do an animation course from the beginning, like another bachelor, because I hold already a scholarship. So I said, okay, I can try to do animation, but this was nothing I ever planned or ever did. So I started to discover animation from the very beginning. I went through all the techniques. I found that I'm horrible in doing movement. I just really don't have a sense of an animator or the feeling of how to create a movement in drone animation, or especially computer animation. I was completely lost. And then I discovered puppet animation. And in this kind of technique, somehow all the experiences that I taught before, it kind of came together, because there was a little bit of performance, there's a little bit of installation, you have to create the sets, you have to create an atmosphere, a story. So somehow I found my way, and I really like this process of making something with the hand, because it is my background from fine arts, so I can apply a lot of things I learned from painting, especially the lighting, the texture, and so on. So I was able to merge all the experiences I had before and put it into animation. And this is the first work that I made. It was my first touch with stop motion animation. And this is in fact the small greenhouse that you can see in Porto in the Gallery of Biodiversity. And it is an installation triptych. But I went to specialize in stop motion animation during my studies in the UK. In Cardiff, Aardman Animation is really big there, and we had really great teachers in my school. I spent there several months, and I had this idea that I will create a long, boring movie about the person who is caring about the plants in the greenhouse, because I wanted just to tell some kind of atmosphere to give the this kind of meditative movie about caring about plants. And I told to my tutor that I want to make a 10-minute film, and he said, okay, you can make 90 seconds. And because this is how much time we had, because we were a big group of students, and we had only maybe 4 days for the animation, and then some more days to prepare the sets and the puppets. So I started to think, how can I manage what I wanted, and I found out that, okay, I can make a 90 seconds movie, but I can make it, I can do it in a loop, and if I show it in space in a loop, then I will get more duration, so it will last longer. This is the feeling that I wanted to get from the movie, but I wasn't able, because at the time I didn't know how long you have to spend animating to get a 10-minute film, like 3 years maybe sometimes. So this was kind of my aha moment, that I discovered that I can show a very small minimalistic movie in a loop to manage to get this kind of duration that I wanted. And in fact, I started to think in another 2 days, I will make 2 alternative movies. They are all really very simple, and they are all using the same character. So it was just basically a very simple set of the greenhouse was a complicated set, but then the other 2 were just one wall and nothing else. But I created 2 alternative storylines. And in this way, I had a kind of a looping narrative with 3 different films. And because these films are not exactly the same in duration, they are around 90 seconds, but not exactly. And every time when they are looping in the gallery, which you can see also here in Porto, they are in every cycle meeting at a different point. So the cause and the consequence is always a little bit shifted. Depending on the moment when you enter to the gallery, you will always get a little bit different story. So it's like a kind of a generative narrative in a very simple manner. So I will try to show it to you now. It is very simple. It is my student work, so be forgiving. But it is a very dear work to mine, because, okay, I will just play all of them from the beginning and maybe keep them on for, I don't know, for 2 cycles or so that you can see the different points where they intersect. I'm not sure if there is sound. So what happens is that she finds a bird in the greenhouse and she throws it away. But in the two alternative storylines, in fact, she kept the bird and she's doing a hairpin. She's plugging the feathers from the bird and she's making something nice of it. And on the third one, she's making herself a hairstyle and putting this feather thing in her hair. So, but in fact, it is up to the viewer to decide. It's never like a complete story. If this really happened, did she really pick up the bird? Is it an opportunity that she just missed, or she's thinking about what she could do with the bird? And this is something that I think can be related to all of us, because in this kind of a closed environment of the greenhouse, which is kind of an inner world of the character, you sometimes have an opportunity or a bird or something little that you may use or you can ignore altogether. And this work is about that. Like, do you take it and do something with it, or do you just pass this opportunity in and remain in your sacred garden on your own? So. My screen. Sorry. So basically this is the setup that you can see here in Porto, where the material element of the same set that I use for animation is in the middle of the gallery, and right behind it you can see itself the animation in the greenhouse. And on the left and on the right side, there are the alternative storylines. And when I exhibited this work first time in Zagreb, I found out that the viewers were really fascinated with the miniature. And normally it is known that our attention is mostly captured by the moving image. For example, if you are sitting in a cafe and there is a TV, you will more or less a little bit look at the TV. It is just because the moving image is so powerful that it's grabbing your attention. But in this case, there were 3 moving images, but the center was in fact a miniature greenhouse. And I was fascinated that in fact in this case, it was the miniature that captured more attention. And so it was an immersive moment on a small scale. So what I captured that people would go there and discover, and in the art world it's not very common that they know a lot about animation and the technique. So I saw how people discover that this is in fact the same set that is used there, and then they had some kind of realization about the size and how it is made, and they started to build a story about the kind of making of the animation. So it had sense in that way. And after this work, I made a linear movie for my graduation in Norway, and it was a 10-minute movie. I collaborated with a friend of mine, and it was a good experience, but at the end we sent to festivals, and I kind of missed this kind of feeling that I was able to produce here. I always felt like, oh, there was this one frame that I would just like to look at it for 10 minutes. And there was just no time for this kind of contemplative moment in the linear film where everything is rolling. So in my master's, I wanted to go back and recreate this kind of feeling, this experience, to be able to make something meditative and to contemplate and to have the time to build some story in our heads, not necessary to be told this story. And I made another triptych, which was called Sisters. And in this case, the movies were synchronized. So it meant that I really carefully edited all the movies, and their relation between one another told a fixed story, not like in Splendid Isolation, a generative one, but here everything was programmed to be exactly on the same time. And this installation you can see in Espinho, and I think already it's on view today, but normally I'm not using music in my films. And on Thursday, when there will be an opening in the evening in Espeño, it is a nice collaboration because I will get students from the music school to play live to this kind of installation. And I'm really looking forward to it because I'm also curious how will this work get another life with the music. So please, you're welcome to join if you come to see this installation. And this is from an exhibition in Serbia. There is 3 projectors, as I told, and also there is, again, a small room that you can take a look inside. But in this case, we never see this room in the movies, so it is not a set from the animation. It is a completely different room because in this movie about the sisters, I studied in Belgium and I was fascinated by the old painters from Dutch countries and Vermeer and his light and all these material qualities of the image. So I kind of tried to make a movie that will recall this kind of aesthetic. And it is about sisters who are kind of stuck in their melancholic everyday life, and we can see how they go by in their day, and there is this room where they never enter. So there is kind of a taboo that we are never really get close to. But once when you are in the gallery, in fact, you can see this room. We can see that it is the same door that they never enter in the movie, but you as a viewer in the gallery, you have a privilege to take a peek inside this room, and there is the key to understand more about these movies. It is here in Espeño, so you can take a look, and basically what you will see inside this miniature house is it's kind of a woman absence from a room that once belonged to a woman, and it is like a bed which is not made. There is things in boxes, and it's basically somebody who is not there anymore. And this is a still image from the film from one of the puppets of the sisters. And I'm not going to show the entire film now, but maybe I will show just a little bit so for you to get a taste of how it looks like. And this film, I was working on the film alone, just as the previous one as well. And this time I had a little bit more time. It was 9 months or 8 months, I think, during the master course that I did a thesis about narratives, fragmented narratives, and that I made this installation. So yeah, I'm sorry that you cannot hear the exact sound. The sound is really minimal, in fact, but there is just some foley that was recorded especially for the film, for all the little movements that the sisters are doing. And here you can also see a little bit of live action. And I tried in this film to use some images to tell a story rather with some miniature object that will evoke the viewer's imagination and kind of just hint towards the story, but not really directly telling the story what exactly it is. It is more a feeling that was supposed to be transmitted and an atmosphere. So maybe I can stop it now, and if you don't manage to come to see the installation, you can always see this one on Vimeo. It is free, so you can approach this, and there are some of my other stop motion films as well, which is a linear film. So you can, you're free to take a look there. And during my studies, I was introduced to this book, Broken Screen. Sorry, I don't know. This was a very big inspiration for me. In this book, the artist, Doug Aitken, he's having kind of informal interviews with another artist who are, it's not for animation, it's for video art, sound art, and different kinds of art, in fact. And he's talking about these people, about the story and how they see the story as a non-linear fact. And I really recommend this book for anyone who is interested in narrative or some different approach to a narrative. It is a really easy read, and it has images like that, for example. And this was really appealing for me in the animation school, because we're always supposed to make a storyboard. You always have to plan really carefully. You have to know what is the final outcome of your film, and I always want to be a little bit more experimental and to have some more freedom in the process so that you can change here and there. And 2 years ago, when I was in Lisbon on the SAS conference, I saw this exhibition at MAT. It is Jasper Just, and this is a really great example of spatial storytelling. With many screens, some are transparent, and he even built this kind of scaffold. So he basically made you a route that you have to follow to read this story. This was a brilliant example, I thought. And after the masters, I still continued to be interested in this kind of storytelling, which gives us freedom to discover more beyond the frame. And I started to study a PhD in animation in Singapore, and this was my main topic. And I read a lot of books. I discovered there were artists who are doing much more things like I did, because when I did these two works that you can see here, these are in fact student works. So I didn't know that there are artists and animators who are already working in this topic in a site-specific manner, as Rose Bond, for example, which example I will show later. And of course, William Kentridge with a lot of experimental animation, with the drawing, with the textures, with the narratives. So I will just play a little bit about his talk. He's a brilliant guy to listen to, and it's so inspirational for me to listen to him. But I will just play a little piece, which I think is really relevant for the narratives. Sorry. So this piece that I will play, it is really relevant to how he's talking about how we perceive a narrative. And he's talking about the collage as an art form. like just a flat visual art form, but I really can feel what he's talking and connect it to the moving images that we create in animation, or just about how we go in our daily lives, because what we get in the daily life, it's not a linear story, because we have so many experiences and you read so much news and fake news, and just we have so many points on the same event from a different perspective that it is not really a linear story that is reflecting our life. It is in fact just fragments, and this is what he's talking about here.
Emblematically, how we make sense of the world outside of the studio, which we naturalize and it becomes invisible. So if you think of a collage as a classic 20th century art form, where you take fragments of a newspaper headline, a photograph, different things, and you combine them together to make a sense. One's very used to that as an artwork. But if you think for one instant, one understands that is the way we have to go through the world. There's no other way of going through the world. We don't have complete information. We can't take it in. We take in a fragment, a headline, a memory of a part of a dream, a phone conversation. And through this, we construct what feels to us and to others as a coherent being. When one understands this self, in fact, is a completely provisional, fragile construction of a walking collage of thoughts and ideas and thinking. So I think that's the way in which the space of the studio.
Okay, that was just this thought that we are having much more contact with the non-linear content than a linear one. So this thought pushed me further to discover more artists. And the next one I would like to show you, it is an animation artist. It is the animation artist Rose Bond. She's creating animated installations which are site-specific. And when I was telling you about the space and the narrative, I forgot to mention that there are narratives which are very dependent on the space where they appear. These are the site-specific works, and this is one of the examples. And of course, there are less specific works. But in this case here, Rose Bond took this building. It was a particular building in the neighborhood where she lived, which went through a lot of change. There was a lot of different communities that were bound to this seaman building, because it was a seaman building, so people who worked on the sea used it as a to gather, to drink, and then there was a Chinese neighborhood, there was something like this. So she is basically portraying this building in a short animation, and she's using the windows that you can see here, and she's projecting in the windows, not only in one, but in more windows at the same time. So sometimes they show different scenes, but sometimes it is just a continuous image if a car drives from one to another. So she's playing with this kind of vignettes that you see a little bit here and a little bit there, but it is sometimes also a continuous image. And I think it is about 12 minutes long, this kind of installation, and because it is on the street, it is talking to the neighborhood. It is basically reflecting the history of the neighborhood back onto itself. And the picture on the right is just taken from the bar, which is opposite the building. And this is also a great initiative because the animation is here served to people who are not necessarily looking for it, but also for the occasional passerby or for the people in the cafe, you can see it. And I think that from this year, CINANIMA is also looking for something like this to open up the medium of animation to more than the festival goers, also to people who are not just in animation, but to just occasional passerbys as well. I can show a little piece of Rose Bond's work just so that you can see how it functions in a more expanded context. So when I discovered this kind of artist, I was again very thrilled to see and learn how they how they went about the spatial storytelling and what are these methods. So I tried on my PhD to see some ways, what are these common ways that we can tell a story different from a linear narrative. And I found that this is a completely different experience, because once you create something which is non-linear, you are not planning anymore in a way that you are planning for a short for the festival. Because, for example, the complete approach, like to your audience, to the space where this will be exhibited, the different storylines that will tangle, it is a different process. And maybe it is also a little bit more challenging and complicated process, because the installation is having a lot of technical problems. Once you're ready with the film, you send it off to festivals and you are free, you travel and you enjoy. But with the installations, there is also always some technical problem. The space is not always the same, the lighting is not always good, and so on. This is for the installations that are meant to be traveling, like the ones that I'm having here. What Rosebond had here, what we saw before, it is meant for one certain building. So it's, again, a different approach. But on my PhD, I wanted to explore these storytelling approaches for space, and then I decided to make a story about a family, the family portrait. And this story is a short animation. It has a short animation version for the festivals, but also an animated version for the installation. And in the case of the installation, it would be a 7-screen installation with a synchronized manner. I will just jump a little bit ahead to show you. But yeah, just shortly, the synopsis, it is basically about a sudden visit of a big family. It is about an intrusion into somebody's private space, because there is a widower and his daughter who are living in this really nice aristocratic house. And suddenly, just before the Austro-Hungarian Empire falls, in this historical moment, a big family of 12 people comes for a sudden visit. So it is about all the chaos that the family is causing to one another. And in the version of the installation, it would be something like that. So you have a main room and another 7 rooms. Every screen would represent a certain room in the house, and the characters would move around freely. And the gallery viewer will actually have to decide whose storyline they want to follow, because, of course, 12 characters plus 14 characters plus 5 animals who are mingling around the house. It is a lot of storylines. They are mostly minimal storylines. It's not very loud. There is chaos, of course, but the chaos is happening in layers, and sometimes the chaos is about just breaking something, but another type of chaos is when it is breaking something or somebody inside. So it is this exploration about the family ties and family relationships, and it is a lot of things to discover. So I thought that this kind of spatial organization is giving us enough time and space to discover and walk around. And if somebody is getting more interested, he can stay more. He can stay for another cycle and then discover maybe something else about a different pair of characters. So that was my decision. And when I'm talking about storyboarding for not a film, but for an installation, it is really a messy process because, for example, for this particular project, the storyboard consists of 7 lines. So basically you are now not just doing one film, but you're doing 7 films, because all screens are related to one another in a way. And if they are synchronized, that means that one character is walking through the screens. So you have to follow really carefully to synchronize well and to plan the animation very well, because the mistake would be really unforgivable if you see the character in 2 places at the same time, because it is more like a realistic approach. So it is really, really difficult and very challenging. And right now I'm in the production process. So hopefully in a year, or maybe a year and a half, the installation and the movies will be ready. to show. And I decided to use again puppet animation for this project. This is just shortly the family, just to show you the family dynamic between Andras and Zsofia. They are the widower, and his daughter. Their relationship is already a little bit difficult because the mother figure is missing, and there is all this conflict that is coming between almost adolescent daughter and a very strict father. So, and we have also a maid. The maid is not here in the picture because she's not a family member, but she's a facilitator between these two groups of people, like a very tiny family versus a very big one. And these are brothers. Andras and Zoltan are brothers with a very different family dynamic. So you can imagine that there will be a lot of chaos once the people come to the house and turn it kind of upside down. And I already shoot a little bit about this film. There is already a pilot. And I'm just showing you the feeling from different rooms. For example, this is from the dining room. And I pay a lot of attention to the little details because in this story also I'm telling, I'm hinting to the story with the object more than by direct action. But there is both. There is a combination of both. And just to make a difference between all these 7 rooms, because it is quite difficult to follow who is going where, all the rooms are a little bit different color and having a different light and hue. Yeah, they are different colors, just so that it is more easier to know where we are at a certain point. And by using stop motion animation, I feel that I can bring a little bit something new, because the examples that I showed from Kentridge, it is drone animation, it is also traditional one. I always prefer traditional and then use technology to help us tell a story maybe in a different space. But today I feel that there is a lot of CG animation, and somehow I always miss this kind of direct touch to the handmade and the crafty sense of the animation. So I try to use stop motion in this sense. And I also found that there is some people who are using animation, this kind of animation in the installation concept, but it is not so many. So there is still a lot of space to explore here. And this is a screenshot of my other film, but I just wanted to show you this kind of textures that is possible to make, you know, but just by picking up something from the nature or finding an old object. And I am always fascinated that there is no need to model it, you know, you just pick it up and it's there. Sorry. So I use this kind of approach of the find objects, but this approach is already famous from other people's animations. Maybe you heard Jan Schwankmajer and the Quay brothers. They are having this very, very rich world of rich textures. And for example, Schwankmajer is very often using used objects, but in a different purpose. And they are kind of combining 2 or more objects to give a different life and to use it in an animation process. Here on the picture, you can also see the meat, the real meat, and it is also a real texture, it is a very interesting emotional response, I think. And it would be nice to use this kind of approach in a more expanded manner. On the lower line is the Quay brothers, and the upper line is Schwankmajer. So these were my early experiences. And I also discovered that once you are showing, this is a different artist, and it is not stop motion animation. It is an automaton, like an old robot, I would say. And she or he is writing, do you believe your eyes or my words? And it is a very creepy kind of atmosphere. And I discovered that when we see this kind of miniature or a puppet's face in a different space, like enlarged, you can see how small the man is there on the right. It's like completely out of the proportion. And something that used to be the crack on the face of the puppet, now it is an abyss. It's like you can lose yourself. So there is this very immediate response to the materiality of the object that I find very fascinating and very necessary in the today's art world in general. So Laura Marx, in her book, The Skin of the Film, she's telling us about this kind of immediate response to the materiality that our eyes is seeing before our brain. So there is this kind of immediate link that you can project, especially when using stop motion animation. This can be some of the magic that is already given and it is already working without you needing to work to project this kind of feeling. And for example, this is one of the contemporary artist duo that is using stop motion animation in the gallery context. Natalie Djurberg and Hans Berg. And Natalie, she's a self-taught animator. She's an artist, a famous artist, I would say. And but she's using animation in this very rough format. It's sometimes it's looking like a child made animation, but it is very rich. And the topics are kind of from grotesque to erotic, sexual, also violence. There is a lot of inspiring works in her work. And here in this piece, the animation is accompanied by real sculptures. They are not used in the animation, but they're kind of talking to each other with the projector. And about this kind of close-ups, I want to show you this quote from Bela Balázs, who is talking to us about using the close-ups. Here he is mostly talking about the close-up of the face in a live-action film, but it can be also related to other close-ups, which I think is really relevant for the miniatures in the stop motion. And basically what he is telling here that these close-ups can be very lyrical and also talk directly to the heart and not the eye. And basically that we can actually see the reflection on the human in the presence of the object. And this is something I also try to use in my films. For example, just to show a scene, for example, like this, of the unfinished cake miniature, which is maybe just, I don't know, 4 millimeters big, but when we enlarge it, we can see the presence of the person who made it. And if we talk about animation and maybe also plastiline animation, when you enlarge, you are able to see sometimes the touch of the person on the puppet. So it is a strange presence that we can leave. And yeah, so basically, this is the work that I'm doing right now, the family portrait, telling the story with these kind of miniatures, with again a little bit slow pace, with more chaos this time, but yeah, using the puppet as the medium to tell it. And normally my puppets are still, they are not changing facial expressions. They are like the old kind of dolls with a little bit like a frozen face. So there is very little expression and very minimal movement, but I think that with the help of texture and light, you can get out so much of these characters, and they can talk to you even though they are not talking, or they are not blinking or making faces. It is a kind of more subtle relationship. So yes, this is, I think, what I wanted to show you. But please, if you have questions, I would be very happy to open this discussion to your experiences or to whatever you might want to ask. So please, yeah, feel free. Thank you.
First of all, thank you for the presentation. Amazing work, really.
Thank you.
And first of all, I was really curious about how do you make all your objects? because they are so well detailed and they are also so small. Like for the first one, the greenhouse, I was like, wow, how did she do this? Because I was thinking maybe she used like small plants to do it, but also plants die out, so you can't really use plants. So how did you guess? How did you make it?
Yeah, thank you for this question. It is my favorite part of making because there is always a challenge, and I think puppet animation and stop motion, it is always a problem-solving matter, and this is why it is always exciting, and there is not one formula that you can use, but it is a constant search for things. And for example, for the greenhouse, this one, because the first film, it was made more than 10 years ago, so of course these plants are dry and die, but it is a mixture of artificial plants and real ones, because I discovered that on the film, when you put a real plant under the light, you get this perfect color, and it goes through the plant. So I tried to use real plants, even though they shrink, but I was really quick because I wanted to have this feeling of a real plant, because when you put an artificial one, it's not so transparent as the leaf. So it's always a little bit a struggle and the combination of both worlds. And here you can also see a mixture in the exhibition. It is a new greenhouse. Of course, it's not the one from the film, but it is a mixture of both live plants and mostly dried and plastic. Right now, I can also show you a little piece which is connected to the plants. When I remade this greenhouse, I used the same method which I did when I was a student, like real and cheap from the Chinese shop. So, but right now for the new film, I have a new method when I make the plants from paper. And it is printed paper, and you can get a really nice texture. So maybe I will use this time to show you a little bit also about the new approach to making things. But basically, how I go about the object is a lot of search, and I collect all the time. Even if I'm making or not making a film, I have a small collection of found objects, and normally I combine them and reuse them. But for the cake, it is a kind of a super scalpy or fimo that you can bake. So it is a hard clay that can stay. But for example, for the bird, if you have to pick up something, it cannot be hard baked. It has to be a plastiline or something that is a little bit animatable. So there is like a lot of things, but I want to show you this just so that you can see the difference between 10 years ago of the plants in the greenhouse and now for the new project. Let me try to find it. And that's, I think it's this one. Sorry, I have to. No, sorry, not this. Yeah. So this particular work, it is from 2020. It is a newer work, but here I used a miniature house to have a kind of walk with the camera inside it. There is no animation, there is no characters. It is just a house, and it is. It happened that the time was beginning of Corona and pandemic, but it's kind of corresponded in a more subtle manner to the things that are happening around us. But it is showing several different rooms and atmospheres. And it is for the first time that I use the camera movement in my film. And this piece is also meant to be shown in the gallery. So as a big projection in a gallery, and you also see in the gallery the small object. The house is of course a miniature, maybe a box like that. So, and only 2 walls made with cardboard, like very cheap. The purpose of this artwork was to kind of confront the viewer how filmic space works, because a lot of people told us, this is a fascinating house, where did you find it, where can you film it? And I was like, I just made 2 walls and we created this house. It doesn't really exist. So, but in the exhibition, the viewer is able to make this kind of relationship between the fragile set of the miniature and the film. And also, I use this work to tell about how fragile is our feeling about a home, because home is for somebody a space, but for me, because I travel a lot and I live in many spaces at the same time, the concept of home is a little bit more mobile as a nomad. So yeah, it's a fragile space of the home and what we call basically the home. But I will fast forward a little bit more to the plans. So here the things that I used is dry moss and paper, like a simple print. In these shots, you have at least 7 different sources of miniatures. Like something is made from scratch, something is found on the flea market, something repurposed, so it's a process. And here you can even see the imperfection that the other side of the plant is white. But I prefer to always have a little bit not perfect, because in these instances you can tell that something is wrong, it's not a real plant, and I want to show that as well. This is already a different room, it's a dining room, but that's the idea of the walk through the camera of the miniature. So, yeah, maybe I can stop here. If you have other questions.
I have another question.
Yeah.
It's about camera work. Like inside such a small set, how do you go live filming it?
Well,
was it a challenge for you?
Well, it's just getting used to it that this is not a dollhouse where everything is perfect and you have 4 walls and nothing moves. Everything is here. Every wall can be removed. Yeah. So it's like a mess. It never looks perfect. It's always 1 wall and the camera, or 2 walls and the camera. It was a little bit challenging to film this one because this is a live action camera, and we had to make a small kind of pan with the hand. But it was also a really nice process because it is for the first time that we made a film in 1 day. Like the person who I worked with, he filmed in one day, and it's so fast, and it was just a completely different process, and there is no time to process the work, because in animation you have so much time to contemplate and make decisions over a year, and here in a second you are kind of done, and that is the work. Yeah, there is another question in the back.
Aside from the limitations of time, how expensive is it to make each one of these short movies? Because I know the materials you kind of collected along the years, and sometimes you can save money on that. But if any one of us would want to make a movie like that, what money would be able to take?
So, for example, for the Splendid Isolation movie, I was also a student on exchange, so I didn't even have the resources I would normally have at home. So basically, it was just to build a greenhouse, and it is not made from glass. You know, you just find the cheap material. I don't even know if I spent maybe 30 euros. I don't know, because the puppet, the school gave us the material for the puppet. So the only thing I had to build is these walls of the greenhouse and collect some dry herbs. So it can be very cheap, but you have to be very inventive and kind of know what you want and find a way how to do it. But for example, for the Sisters movie, I think I maybe spent, I don't know, 300 euros. It's also a master student work. So it is possible to make these cheap movies, but it is because inside is a wire. The construction of the puppet is a wire armature, so I was able to do it myself. I know how to make it, but if you need a bigger team, you know, your resources will grow. So the more you can do yourself, the luckier you are. But I'm not saying working in a team is not great. It's the best thing ever, but it's just if you can afford it. And of course, a lot of help from your friends. And sometimes for the graduation film, I teamed up, because in this way we got 2 funds. It was maybe, I think, 1,000 euros, the 2 of us together. So I didn't show this film. It is on Vimeo. But you can see it is, so it is possible to make a movie under 500 euros, but it depends on the armature. Because in the new film, in the family portrait, I will for the first time use the ball and socket armature, which is crafted for every single puppet, and now there is 12 puppets, so you know the budget is growing a lot, but this is because I am able to work with friends and we got a good co-production. So it is always according to the needs and what you can do within, but before this bigger production, I always try to build puppet on a cheap side and see what is important for me and just keep my eyes open to whatever I can find and gather from used materials and countries like ours. I think Serbia, Croatia, also in Portugal, in the flea markets, I gather amazing things. Like you can find some old, really precious, even small materials, like old ones, for like no money at all. So I think money shouldn't be ever like a problem, because there is always things how you can solve it. Probably the biggest problem is just to learn how to make a cheap puppet, the puppet armature, because if your puppet cannot stand and cannot move, you will not be able to animate. So that's the base for the cheap movie to learn. And now you have a lot of sources online, so you can even go to some blogs and learn it yourself. So it's possible to make a cheap movie.
I'm really curious how you managed to do the tapestries in the movies. In the movie of the family, which I forgot the name, there was the shot of the boy, of the man.
Yeah.
There was a small rug underneath it.
Yeah.
Like, how big is that rug?
That rug is it's from China. It's from a shop that you can for a real miniature house. But the problem is that the scale of the real miniature, which you can buy now cheaply from Asia, it's a completely different scale from the puppet. My puppets are, I'm not sure, but they are like maybe like the microphone, so it's much bigger than the miniature scale. So I use maybe 4 or 5 carpets in a bigger room, and then I cut and glue them together, because I found that it's also possible to print on a different surface, but expense, and you don't know. And so for even from the French production, I said that I will order from Asia, because I'm sure that the stitches are on a good size of the stitches, and then I will just glue them together to make a pattern. Yeah.
I have a question for the narrative in the spatial animation. For example, for the family portrait, you said it's 7 screen. And for me, sometimes when I go to exhibitions, it's overwhelming if I have so many different input. I don't know what to follow. And I would like to know if you like do breaks in your narratives of the 7 stories, or how you direct a little bit the view.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Thank you. There is always the fear of the missing out. It is called FOMO. There is a word for that, and it is applied to also VR films or any 360 experience, because we have a choice. It's not anymore just a single screen and a fixed position, because when you move your body, of course, you are fearing that you are missing something important. And I just, in my work, I just embrace this possibility. And then I put all the responsibility on the viewer. But of course, I use methods, because if there is a storyline that is very important for me, for the viewer to see, then I would use sound. Mostly sound is the method that you also react immediately and instinctively. So that is one of the easiest way how to direct the viewer's attention. By sound, also by dark and light. Sometimes in the Sisters movie, you can see that I faded some of the images, and then you had to only one choice, to look at only one, or to, so there is different ways how to direct the attention. But in the new movie with the 7 screens, I want to embrace this opportunity to kind of give different storylines to different people, because you have to choose your characters to follow, and of course you are gonna miss something, but it also will give you a unique story, a unique view of the family. And I think, especially in this topic of the family, you know, there is a lot of small entities, and there is the bigger picture. And at some point in my film, the family gathers. In the final shot, they gather together. So eventually, I direct them to one space. But it is challenging to tell stories like that. And I was just talking at CINANIMA with another director who used to make synchronized stories, and he sometimes tells that he just gave up of the synchronization, because it's hard to manage a lot of things together. And most of these artworks that I see in the galleries, they are more like in a free loops, so that you have a more provisional time to figure out the things. But yeah, there is definitely some of the methods that I mentioned, as sound, light, even color. In one of the colors, in one test, there I had 7 screens, and there was a strawberry cake on the one of the screens, and the strawberry was very bright red, and the other colors are like this, a little bit like pastel and dark. And this color of the strawberry, it ruined everything, because everybody was looking in the direction of the red spot, and it was not my intention at all. So I had to remove, and these kind of things you only see when you have all the 7 things. It's very hard to plan these little things. But finally it was removed, and I replaced with this brown cake that you saw here. So even, yeah. Yeah. Which one? There is a different, for example, the movie with the home, when the camera is moving, I just told that the filming took just 1 day, because it was a live action camera moving. But for example, in the Splendid Isolation with the greenhouse, I had only 4 days to animate all the films, and maybe, I don't know, maybe I spent 1 month on making the greenhouse and the puppet, maybe 2 months, but only 4 days of filming, because that is how much in the school we got. So it's very different. And the sisters I made in 9 or 8 months, 9 months, something like this. But the family portrait, the preparation for this big last film, which is a co-production, it already lasts for 5 years. So the time frame is really dependent on your resources, depending if you are in a school. Because when you are in the school, you are under the wings of an institution that is guiding you. You are given a space, a team that can maybe help you a little bit. But when you are on your own, you have to find a producer, a good one, 2 or 3 producers at a time. So once you're out of the school, you kind of have to find a way how to go about it. Yeah. Well, puppet animation is done in the way that you have an armature in the puppet, which is wire, so you can bend the arms and everything. And basically, I use 12 movements for 1 second. So that means that you have to make 12 little movements and then play, and then you get 1 second of the movement. So with the wire, it's a little bit harder, because the more advanced armatures are not going back and forth like the wire, but it is possible. All the films that I showed you were made from a cheap wire armature, which I did, so it's perfectly possible. But the smaller the things are, the most challenging it is getting to move the puppet. Yep.
First of all, thank you very much for sharing with us your process. I think all your work is fascinating.
Thank you.
Very important, this materiality that you have, I agree. And I have just 2 questions. One is very simple. What is the material used in that cake, the brown cake?
The brown cake is, I think it's a mixture of a Fimo and Super Sculpey. Super Sculpey is a kind of a Fimo thing, but for example, the face here is also baked. So Super Sculpey is a plastiline kind of thing that you bake, and it has already this color of the skin. And when I actually didn't use much Fimo, because you have to buy a lot of colors. So I just use Super Sculpey for everything. And even the small food I didn't show, but I bake everything, and then I color with acrylics. So in this way, and I think for the shine on the top of the cake, you can use some glue is not so good. Some glues will melt, but it is all type of experiment, but some varnish, a little varnish to give some shine for the top.
And the other question is about your early process. When you start developing ideas and trying to materialize something, do you use drawing, sketching, or do you immediately start doing or reutilizing materials and doing some pilot tests?
First, I always have some idea in my mind about the space. And for example, for this, I already visited one house and I took some pictures, photographs, because it is in the early 20th century. So there was a concrete house that I used as a reference, and I took pictures of it before I built the interiors. But for the characters, I use also a lot of screenshots when I'm watching movies. And for the camera work and for the cinematography, I am always looking for ways how you can tell with the light and the camera some kind of feeling. So I have a stash of a lot of inspiration. Drawing, I use very little, maybe just for the design of the character. But even when I'm designing the face, I sculpt mostly and have a reference picture of 10 different people, and then I start to sculpt. Somehow, even though I finished drawing and painting, it kind of went out of my hand, and I kind of use some collage even for the for the storyboard, when I apply for the film fund, I prefer to always make a little set, so because it gives such a good idea. If it's not a drone animation but a puppet animation, you can already, with the light and with the minimal setup, you can give some good idea of your atmosphere. So I think for this 3D kind of model work, it's good to already have something three-dimensional, better than a drawing. Yes?
When it comes to moving the fingers, do you also have wire inside of them, or do you use, for example, feel without being magnetic?
Wires. It is wires in the fingers, and they are dipped in latex. So latex is a flexible material, so you don't have to bake it. And in fact, now I'm teaching at Lusofona University, and I teach puppet animation. So we are gonna do the hands in this way because it's quite easy to dip, and you already get the skin texture, and it's not breaking like Fimo or other kind of material. Yeah. Fimo, it's a kind of plastiline material. It's like clay material in different colors. And you use it to make jewelry or something like that. And after you form the shape that you want, you bake it in the oven, and it becomes hard. So it stays like that for a long time. Yeah. I didn't hear you, sorry.
I said, I also wanted to say that I appreciate your work and I like everything
Thank you.
you do. I didn't say that, I just wanted to last question.
Thank you so much. Thank you. One more question. For these characters, I use real hair, my hair, and yeah, and friends' hair. The blonde is somebody else, but normally even the hair is a bit too fat. It has to be a thin hair, otherwise the proportion is not so good. But when it is not fixed, of course, you can accidentally bump into the hair, and it looks like wind in the hair. So it's you have to be very, very careful with the hair. But for example, if it's a boy, you can just glue this texture to the head. With the girl with like a longer hair, it is just a matter, you can even glue like a piece of hair together to avoid like moving a lot. Yeah.
Everybody happy with the question? Yeah. So Lea, thank you very much. I think the students were quite curious and very interested in your work, otherwise we wouldn't have so many questions. So thank you very much for coming. And obrigada a vocês também. E aproveitem o resto do dia, sonhem e animem tudo que aparecer na aula.
Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you.